In this episode, we move from identifying and evaluating risk into the more practical question that every serious organization eventually has to answer. What are we actually going to do about the risk we found? That is where developing and executing risk treatment plans becomes so important for anyone studying certified in risk and information systems control. See risk. A risk assessment can reveal important exposures, but awareness by itself does not protect systems, support the business, or reassure leadership that action is underway. A treatment plan is the bridge between knowing and doing. For a brand new learner, the easiest way to understand this topic is to think of it as the organization's structured response to a known concern, where people decide how the risk will be handled, who will handle it, how progress will be tracked, and what acceptable improvement should look like over time. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A risk treatment plan is a documented approach for responding to a specific risk or group of related risks in a deliberate, accountable way. It explains how the organization intends to reduce, avoid, transfer, or accept a risk based on business context, available resources, control options, and leadership decisions. That sounds straightforward, but the real value comes from the fact that a plan forces the organization to move beyond vague statements about needing to improve security. Instead of saying this area needs attention, the plan defines the condition, the response, the owner, the timeline, and the expected result. This makes treatment real enough to manage rather than leaving it as a discussion point that reappears in every meeting with slightly different wording. A strong plan is not only a document. It is a commitment mechanism that makes sure the risk response has direction, visibility, and enough detail to survive daily operational pressure. One of the biggest beginner misconceptions is thinking that treatment always means fixing the problem completely. In practice, organizations do not always remove risk entirely, and they often cannot. Some risks can be reduced significantly. Some can be shifted in part through contracts or insurance. Some can be avoided by changing business decisions, and some may be accepted if the remaining exposure is judged tolerable by the right authority. The treatment plan exists because those choices should not happen casually or invisibly. They should be considered in relation to business goals, regulatory obligations, customer expectations, technical realities, and the organization's broader willingness to tolerate uncertainty. This is why treatment planning is not just a technical exercise. It is a decision-making exercise that helps leaders answer how much action is enough, what trade-offs are reasonable, and how the organization will know whether the chosen response is actually changing the risk in a meaningful way. A good plan starts with a clear understanding of the risk itself, because a weakly defined risk usually produces a weakly defined response. If the organization cannot explain what could happen, why it matters, what conditions make it possible, and what business impact could follow, then the treatment plan may drift into generic activity that looks responsible but does not address the real issue. Strong planning begins by describing the risk in business-relevant terms. That often includes the asset or process involved, the threat or failure condition, the vulnerability or control weakness that makes the event possible, and the likely consequences if the event occurs. For a beginner, this is a crucial point because it shows that good treatment is rooted in clarity. If the problem is described vaguely, the plan will likely be vague too. A risk response becomes far more useful when everyone understands the same exposure in the same way and is working toward the same outcome. Prioritization comes next because organizations usually have more risks than they can treat at once. That means they need to decide which risks require immediate attention, which can be scheduled over time, and which may need only monitoring for now. Prioritization should reflect more than simple fear or recent headlines. It should consider impact, likelihood, regulatory significance, business dependency, data sensitivity, customer exposure, and the degree to which the risk threatens strategic objectives or core operations. A high-risk weakness in a critical process should not compete equally with a low-impact issue in a less important environment just because both were discovered during the same month. For beginners, the lesson is that treatment planning depends on disciplined choice, not broad promises to improve everything everywhere at once. When priority is clear, resources can be directed where they matter most, leadership can make informed trade-offs, and the organization can avoid the common mistake of spreading effort so thinly that no important risk is reduced enough to matter. The choice of treatment approach is one of the most important parts of the plan because it determines the overall direction of the response. Risk reduction is the most familiar option, where the organization adds or strengthens controls to lower likelihood, reduce impact, or improve detection and response. Risk avoidance means changing the activity itself so the exposure no longer exists in that form, such as not entering a market, not using a certain technology, or stopping a vulnerable process. Risk transfer shifts some of the financial or contractual burden to another party, although accountability often remains with the organization in practical terms. Risk acceptance means leadership knowingly decides the remaining exposure is tolerable under current conditions. For a beginner, the key idea is that treatment is not one size fits all. The right choice depends on business value, cost, timing, technical feasibility, and how much residual risk will remain after the chosen response is put into place. Once the treatment direction is chosen, the plan needs specific actions rather than broad intentions. This is where the difference between planning and wishing becomes very visible. A weak plan might say that access controls will be improved, monitoring will be enhanced, or vendor oversight will be strengthened, but those statements do not tell anyone what will actually change. A stronger plan defines the concrete measures that will be introduced, updated, or retired. It may describe new approvals, revised procedures, added reviews, stronger technical restrictions, better logging, changes to contracts, improved documentation, or targeted training depending on the nature of the risk. The important point is that each action should connect clearly to the exposure being treated. For beginners, this helps make the topic far more practical. A real treatment plan should allow a reader to understand what work is expected, why that work matters, and how it is supposed to reduce the risk rather than simply making the organization look busy. Ownership is essential because treatment plans do not execute themselves. Someone must be accountable for moving the response forward, coordinating with other stakeholders, reporting progress, and making sure the planned actions do not vanish under competing business demands. In many cases, more than one group is involved. A business owner may understand the process impact, a technology team may implement changes, a risk team may provide oversight, and legal or procurement teams may help when third parties or contracts are involved. Even so, the plan should make it clear who owns the overall outcome and who owns the individual actions inside the plan. For a beginner, this is another reminder that risk management depends heavily on governance. A plan with no clear owner tends to become a shared concern that nobody fully controls. Strong treatment planning removes that ambiguity early so that deadlines, escalations, and accountability all have somewhere definite to land when work begins to slow or conditions begin to change. Time frames and sequencing also matter because many treatment actions depend on one another. Some changes can happen quickly, while others require budget approval, technical redesign, contract changes, process retraining, or scheduled maintenance windows. A good plan recognizes those realities and builds a timeline that is serious without pretending every issue can be fixed immediately. It should also distinguish between temporary safeguards and longer-term corrective measures. Sometimes the best path is to introduce a short-term compensating control that reduces exposure while a more durable solution is developed and approved. For beginners, this is important because it shows that a good treatment plan is neither reckless nor passive. It balances urgency with realism. Unrealistic deadlines create repeated extensions and loss of credibility, while vague deadlines create endless drift. The strongest plans break the response into sensible phases, show how one step enables the next, and keep leadership aware of what improvement is expected at each stage. Execution is where many treatment plans succeed or fail, because real work always meets real friction. Budgets shift, priorities compete, people change roles, dependencies appear, and teams may resist a response that affects speed, convenience, or long-standing habits. That is why execution requires more than sending out the plan and waiting for updates. It needs active follow-through, communication, issue handling, and sometimes leadership intervention. If a treatment plan depends on changes to a business process, the affected teams need to understand the reason for the change and what success looks like. If the plan introduces new control steps, those steps must fit into actual workflows strongly enough that people can sustain them. For beginners, the most important lesson here is that execution is not separate from the plan. The plan should already reflect the business reality into which it will be introduced. Treatment plans are strongest when they are built with implementation in mind instead of assuming that approval alone will create momentum. Dependencies deserve special attention because many risks cannot be treated fully by one team working in isolation. A plan may rely on changes to a third-party service, a project timeline, an architecture decision, a data cleanup effort, or coordination across multiple business units. If those dependencies are not visible, the plan may look simple on paper while being difficult or even impossible to complete as written. Mature organizations surface those dependencies early and decide how they will be managed, monitored, or escalated. They also pay attention to whether the treatment effort itself introduces temporary risk, such as when systems are being changed, access models are being redesigned, or vendor relationships are being restructured. For a beginner, this part of the topic highlights a broader truth about risk management. Most meaningful treatment efforts live inside a web of relationships, approvals, and operational constraints. The more clearly those connections are understood, the more likely the response will move forward without unpleasant surprises that delay the work or weaken the intended result. Monitoring progress is a major part of execution because a treatment plan is only useful if the organization can tell whether it is moving forward, falling behind, or solving the wrong problem. Progress should not be measured only by whether meetings occurred or tasks were marked complete. It should also consider whether the plan changes are actually being implemented, whether the risk exposure is decreasing, whether deadlines remain realistic, and whether new issues have appeared that require adjustment. This is where oversight and reporting become important. Leaders need visibility into open actions, overdue milestones, barriers to completion, and changes in residual risk so they can make decisions before the plan quietly stalls. For beginners, progress monitoring is one of the clearest examples of why risk treatment is not just a project management activity and not just a control activity. It sits between the two. The organization is managing work, but it is doing so for the specific purpose of changing the risk picture in a measurable and accountable way. Residual risk remains central throughout the process because even a well-executed treatment plan rarely removes all uncertainty. After the planned actions are complete, the organization still needs to ask what exposure remains, whether that remaining level is acceptable, and whether additional treatment is needed. This is where many immature programs make a mistake. They treat action as proof of success instead of asking whether the action reduced the risk enough for the business context. A control may have been added, a procedure may have been updated, and training may have been delivered, but the remaining risk might still be too high because the environment is critical, the threat is evolving, or implementation was only partial. For a beginner, the lesson is that treatment is judged by outcome, not effort alone. Residual risk helps leaders stay honest about whether the response was actually sufficient. It also reinforces the idea that treatment planning is connected to broader risk appetite and governance decisions, not just to completion of technical or procedural tasks. Common treatment plan failures usually come from the same patterns. Some plans are too vague to guide action. Some assign work without real ownership. Some set ambitious dates with no resources behind them. Some focus on easy tasks that look productive while leaving the core exposure mostly unchanged. Others fail because the plan is developed by a central function without enough business involvement, so implementation runs into resistance or misunderstanding once it reaches the people who actually operate the process. Beginners should understand that treatment plans fail less often because the concept was wrong and more often because the plan was not grounded in real conditions. The strongest plans are clear, prioritized, actionable, resourced, owned, monitored, and flexible enough to adapt when circumstances shift. They do not assume everything will go perfectly, but they do make it much harder for important risks to remain untreated simply because nobody converted concern into accountable work. A simple example makes the full idea easier to picture. Imagine an organization identifies a high risk around outdated access management for a critical internal application that supports financial decisions. The risk assessment shows that former employees can keep access too long, managers do not review privileges carefully, and logging is not strong enough to support quick investigation if misuse occurs. A weak response would be to announce that access oversight must improve. A stronger treatment plan would define the risk clearly, prioritize it based on business impact, choose risk reduction as the primary treatment approach, assign ownership to the application and access governance leaders, set actions for account cleanup, review redesign, improve logging, and manager guidance, establish timelines, identify dependencies on identity data quality, and monitor progress until the process is working reliably. After implementation, the organization would reassess whether enough risk remains to require further action. That example shows what a treatment plan really is. It is a structured path from exposure to decision to execution to verification. As we close, the main idea to carry forward is that developing and executing risk treatment plans is how organizations turn risk awareness into disciplined, accountable action. The plan is not supposed to be a decorative document or a vague promise that improvement is coming someday. It is supposed to define the response clearly enough that people can act, leaders can oversee progress, and the organization can judge whether the chosen path actually reduced the risk to an acceptable level. C-Risk expects you to understand that treatment involves prioritization, choice of response, ownership, timing, execution, monitoring, and reassessment of residual risk. All of those pieces matter because risk management is not complete when a weakness is identified. It is complete only when the organization has made a conscious decision about how to respond and has followed that decision through with enough discipline to change the real-world exposure. That is why treatment plans sit at the heart of practical risk management.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.